In this video, I'm going to talk about the propagating LSPs on a broadcast link. You know that in previous video, I talked about the propagating LSP on a point-to-point link. And as a summary, we know that in the point-to-point link, we are using LSP and also CSMP and also PSMP for exchanging the information for ISIS. Okay, you know that at the start of the process in the adjacency build up, first we need to send one CSMP, okay, and after receiving the PSMP, okay, from the next router, we can advertise the for example LSP. This is the summary of all of the process. Here is the LSP, okay? And you know that CSMP contain the compressed format of the link state database or a router ID or system ID, and also a sequence number. In PSMP, we have the request for receiving the complete information, and after that LSP contain the link states. Also, you know that finally we need to send another PSMP to acknowledge the receiving of the LSP. This is the process of the exchanging or propagating LSPs on a point-to-point link. And also, as I mentioned in the previous video, you know that in the point-to-point links, when we have changed, only we need to send LSP, and after that we can receive PSMP as an acknowledgement. Here we don't need to send CSMP, and CSMP only is sent in the time of adjacency establishment, but after that we are only sending the LSP, and after that for example we can receive PSMP as an acknowledgement. This is the process that I mentioned before, and I talked about the detail and some other for example notes about this process. But now I'm going to talk about the propagating LSP on a broadcast link. Let me first review some of the topics that you learned before in the previous video. You know that in the broadcast link we have one DIS or designated IS, and you know that DIS is a router with the highest priority, or if all routers or for example all interfaces have the same priority, the DIS is the router with the highest MAC address or highest SNPA. I showed you, I configured for you this feature, and you know how DIS is elected. After that, as you know, DIS has some function. Two most function of the DIS is, or for example a DIS is responsible for two important operational functions. The first is helping routers on a broadcast segment to synchronize. What does this mean? What does this mean that helping routers? What is the help for router? How DIS can help the other routers? Let me to talk about this. And also the next function of the DIS is representing the broadcast segment in the link state database as a standalone object, or the pseudonode. This second function or operation of DIS maybe is easier. You know that when we are configuring the broadcast network with ISIS, after this DIS election, DIS can represent itself as a pseudonode. For example, if this is our scenario, we have a DIS here, and this is a pseudonode, okay? And this means that the DIS, for example, assume that the DIS is R3, now has this responsibility to representing the pseudo node, okay? And we are using the pseudo node for converting this broadcast network, these multi-access networks, to some point-to-point networks, not the network type of point means the links between two devices. First is, for example, physical device, and then virtual device or pseudo node device. This is the second function. Let me to review. DIS has two responsibility in broadcast networks. The first is helping routers on a broadcast segment to synchronize. I'm going to talk about this in this video, but the next for example, responsibility of the DIS is representing the broadcast segment in the link state database as a standalone object, the pseudo node. Okay. Now let me to talk about the first function, first responsibility of the DIS, helping routers on a broadcast segment to synchronize. How DIS can help the other routers to synchronize? What is the meaning of the help in this, for example, propagating LSP? Synchronization of ISIS routers on a broadcast network is so simple, okay? The DIS creates and sends a CSMP packet in regular interval by default in 10 seconds on the segment. Look at here, as you can see in this picture, the DIS, in this picture we have a broadcast segment and the DIS is this router. In the intervals of the 10 seconds by default, okay, DIS should generate CSMP packets and sending on the segment. This CSMP packet lists all LSPs present in the DIS's link state database. You know that DIS has the link states of other routers. For example, in our scenario, if DIS is the router 3, okay, DIS has the LSPs of the router 1 and also router 2 and also router 3. In regular intervals of the 10 seconds, DIS should generate CSMP packets, okay, such as the picture. You can see that we have CSMP packet. After that, every router now is, for example, receiving the CSMP packet. You know that if the CSMP is generated for level 1 database, it should use this MAC address as I mentioned before, and if the CSMP is generated for the level 2 database, the destination MAC address of the CSMP is this MAC address, the bottom MAC address, as I mentioned before. Okay, this CSMP packet lists all LSPs present in the DIS's link state database. Okay, other routers means, for example, R1 or R2 non-DIS ISS on the segment receive the CSMP and compare it to the index of their own link state database with the, for example, sequence number. And we have, for example, some possibility. The first possibility is that, for example, R1 doesn't have the for example, CSMP's sequence number LSP in its database, it can request it. Or maybe R1 has the same version, it doesn't request. Okay, let me to talk about this after some second, but for now, you know that when the DIS sending the CSMP in regular intervals of 10 seconds, every other router receiving this CSMP, and if they need the detail of that CSMP, okay, they can send PSMP. This means that I need the LSPs, and after that DIS can advertise, can for example send the LSP, the actual LSP, the requested LSPs to the network. This means that we are using the DIS for synchronizing the broadcast segment. Now let me to talk about the for example feature that when other routers receiving the CSMP, what is the possibility that for the other routers. Here we have some possible scenarios. Okay, the first is that, for example, this router or for example R2 or R3 now advertise CSMP with the sequence number. R2 receives this CSMP. Here we have three possibilities. The first is that the router means R2 has an LSP with the same LSP ID in its link state database with the same sequence number. Assume that, for example, R1 sent the CSMP, okay, with the LSP, with a specific LSP, for example, LSP of the router 1, quad 0, then quad 0, 0001 dot, for example, 00-00, and the sequence number of the 0x, for example, 000000, then, for example, 04. Okay, this is the sequence number, and after that, this CSMP